difficulties getting on today because I know there were almost 200 people signed up and only 50 people are on. And my coworker is currently on with iLink trying to get the closed captioning working. So I do want to just let people know we are working on getting the closed captioning to work.
And I'm also believing that 150 other people who need to be on this webinar are going to be able to join. So I'm just sending out right now all kinds of energy prayers up, whatever people's spiritual practices are. This is an important webinar, and it needs to come on for everyone who signed up, and I'm believing that.
Thank you, Sandra. Sandra, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
At least from my phone.
So
I'm sorry?
Is that better?
That's a little better.
Okay.
All right. So
on the speakerphone for my phone, so maybe we should take you off the phone speakerphone. Or
maybe if you can speak directly into the phone, it would be better. But are you two sharing a phone?
Yeah, but I can go get another phone if that's what I need to do.
Well, maybe you could do that while I'm doing this introduction here.
All right, let me go get that.
Okay. Okay, sorry about these difficulties. I really, really do apologize because we really want to honor everyone's time, and start right on time. And we are going to continue to work on the closed captioning. I do apologize. I'm Sue Osthoff with the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women in Philadelphia, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. And before we begin this presentation, I have to go over some logistics for today's webinar. And those of you who have participated in webinars through iLink before, you know the drill, so you can definitely go and get a cup of coffee or tea now for about 5 or 6 minutes. But if you're new to your these webinars, or if you're having some technical difficulties, you will probably want to hear this. If you're disconnected at any time, go back to that original email that you got early this morning and just try to log back in. It's the best to get all the way out and then try to get back in. If you continue to have trouble, call iLink support at 800-799-4510. My coworker Katita, who's one of my wing women today, just put that into the chat box in the lower left corner. And my other coworker, Dot Goldberger, is helping out today too. So thanks to both of them. So that chat box in the lower left corner, I know many of you already know about it. Why don't we test it out? Basically what you do to use the chat box is that you put your cursor in the lower left-hand box and then type your message and then hit enter to send it. So why don't we try it? If you could just say where it is that you're calling in from, and if there's more than one of you at the site, if you could enter that information as well too, that would be really helpful. So go ahead and say where you're calling in from, please, so we can see. That's great. Thank you, guys. As you probably already noticed, everyone's muted, so please, we're going to be using this chat feature for questions, problems, and comments. And during this presentation today, I'll be collecting questions during the webinar, and as time allowing, we'll pose as many as we can to the presenters at the end of their presentation. So please put your questions in the chat box, and I will acknowledge them when I see them. Again, for technical problems, call iLink directly at 800-799-4510, or put your questions in the chat box. If you're only joining us by phone today, you can email my coworker Katita with your questions, and that is queetita@ncdbw.org. We are recording this webinar today, and you'll be able to access this on our website, and that is www.ncdbw.org, and that should be up hopefully in about a week or 10 days. We've also posted today's PowerPoint in a version that you should be able to save and or print, unlike the one that comes up through iLink, and we posted the presenters' full bios. on Google Docs. The link that was in a reminder note that you got this morning will get you there, and Katita will post it again now, so thank you. And you do not need to go get that stuff now if you're in through iLink and you're seeing the PowerPoint on your screen now. We're still working on the closed captioning, and so sorry about that. If that does come on, I will tell you how you can get it off your screen if you need to. Also, I will send an email to all of you shortly after the webinar. It will contain a confirmation of your attendance, a link to the posted recording, and a very brief survey. The same survey will also pop up right at the end of the webinar. It's really helpful to our speakers and to us as we plan future webinars if you could take really about a minute and a half to 2 minutes to fill it out. So if you'd do that, we'd really appreciate it. So what we want to do now, my coworker Dot is in on my computer, and we are trying to get this closed captioning going. And I think is it working now? Heather, maybe you could. Lisa, maybe you could try to see if the closed captioning is working now. She's still working on it. Anyway, it's really helpful to us if we have a little information about who is on the call. So what we're going to do is give you a couple of questions to answer. Those of you who are on the system, if you can actually answer the questions on the screen. They should be up in a minute. So how do you describe your profession? So if you could click, if you're a community-based advocate, just click that little dot right next to the community-based advocate on the screen. And if you're an OVW grantee, yes or no, can you please just click the little dot on the screen? And we'll share the results so you can see. And Sandra and April, you can see the results there. And if you are an OVW grantee, if you could please specify your grant program, that's really helpful. So we'll just give a minute or two for people to fill that in. So as I hope you all can see now that the vast majority of people who are on this call right now are community-based advocates and people like Coalition, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Coalition staff, and our national technical assistance providers, but we also do have some staff at jail and prison and our Department of Corrections staff. So let's give it another 30 seconds or so for people to fill those in. If you could just click your answers directly there on the screen, that's most helpful. So thank you. Okay. So for those of you who just joined, because some people have come on since we started, I'm Sue Osthoff with the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women, and I really want to extend a warm welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is the 8th in our series of webinars about when survivors reenter their communities after jail or prison. And if you missed the other webinars in this series, recordings of most of them, one of them failed to record due to technical difficulties, but most of them are up on our website. And so you just go to ncdbw.org and then to resources and scroll on down, and you can find the recordings, which include the PowerPoints and the recordings from each of those sessions. And before we go any further, I want to thank the Office on Violence Against Women for their support of this project on reentry. We think it's so great and so important that they're supporting work on survivors who are reentering their communities. As you've probably noticed, that all the participants are muted, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll be collecting questions during the presentation. Please put your questions in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner, and time allowing, we will ask as many as we can to the presenters at the end of their presentation. So finally, as you're probably aware today, today's webinar is titled Sister Outsider, The Long Journey Home for Incarcerated Survivors of Battering. And it's a real pleasure to introduce our speakers today. And in an effort to save time, I'll only do brief introductions now, and I encourage you to read their full bios, even though these are shortened versions of their bios. And I'm sorry that the print is so small. We also put them up on Google Docs. I mean, it's hard to do a brief introduction of these two amazing women who both have such a wealth of relevant experiences, but I'm going to try. And I'll start with April Marie Young, and she's a mother of 5 children and is a member of the board of directors of Keeping the Bonds, Inc., which is a nonprofit that provides pro bono legal assistance to incarcerated mothers. She herself is a formerly incarcerated woman, a survivor of domestic violence, and a recovering addict, who has not only been clean for 15 years, but who has been able to turn her adversity into victory and has become an amazing advocate for other women facing the same challenges she did. And I'll stop here because April's going to be talking a lot about her journey through this presentation, and you can also read more about her on the slide that's here. The other speaker today is Sandra Barnhill, and her bio says that she's an attorney, that she's the founder and president of Forever Family, Inc., which was formerly called Aid to Children of Imprisoned Mothers, AIM, which is a national nonprofit located in Atlanta. And it provides direct service programming for children and families affected by parental incarceration. Sandra's bio talks about her many awards and honors, and it talks about her education. It mentions that she was selected as one of Atlanta's top 100 black women of influence. What her bio doesn't say is that she should have been selected as one of the United States top 100 black women, top 100 women, top 100 people of influence, and I'm not kidding, especially when it comes to working with incarcerated women and their families. The Ford Foundation recognized Sandra for her pioneering work, and I think all of us should do the same. Sandra became one of my earliest and best teachers over 25 years ago and has continued to teach me and to push me to do my work better ever since. She is all about keeping it real, even when sometimes that is difficult to do. I wish I had more time to talk about how much I love and admire Sandra and the work she does. Thank you, Sandra, for all. And we're really honored to have you and April join us today. So I want to turn this over to them one last time. If you're having trouble with anything technical, please call iLink support 800-799-4510, 799-4510. And without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Sandra and April.
Well, thank you, Sue. I'm Sandra.
I'm April.
Hey, we are so glad to be on this webinar with you called Sister Outsiders, The Long Journey Home. Before we get started, though, it seems to me it's important to acknowledge what has happened in the few moments as we prepared for this webinar, because I think what happened is indicative of what happens to women who are survivors and to those of us who join them and do the work. It is this: we do the work under great opposition and with difficulty. And it doesn't mean that we do not do the work. We definitely do the work, but we do it realizing that there's a cost. We don't necessarily count that cost, but we do understand that this work is painful, powerful, and that it takes almost everything that we have to do it. And so I just wanted to lift that up because we come into our time together really acknowledging and lifting up the power of women and the power of women who survive. And today we're talking about Sister Outsiders. And April and I gave the session that title because we wanted to honor and celebrate the woman spirit and one of our sheroes, Audre Lorde, and in every woman who is a survivor of domestic violence. And so I really, at this time, want to just ask April to say a little bit about Audre Lorde.
Audre Lorde was born February 18th, 1934. She passed November 17th.
April, I'm so sorry to interrupt. You're very difficult to hear. If you could get closer to your phone or the mic, that would be really helpful.
Okay. Yes. Audre Lorde was born February 18th, 1934. She passed November 17th, 1992. This month marks the anniversary of Audre Lorde's death. She was a woman who fought against injustice and the marginalization of all women, including those who have been battered and imprisoned. We honor her life, work, and legacy through this webinar and our continued work with and for women who are claiming and reclaiming their lives.
Whew. Well, what you have today is two presenters who are black and female who have been working for a combined 45 years. And so we are happy to be with you. We have another quote on the screen by Audre Lorde, and I'm not going to read it. But what it talks about is both the strength and the weakness of the sister outsider or the outsider. And it also talks about the importance of community and the need for community and each of us in this work if we're going to move forward. Well, I said that this webinar is going to be about our lived experience. I'm going to get April to just kind of introduce herself. Sue didn't give her full resume, which was cool. But April, talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you seen in my bio, I am on the board of directors with Keeping the Bond. What they do, they provide legal assistance to incarcerated mothers. I'm also connected with Women at the Well Transitional Center. I'm also on their board of directors. And what I do, I mentor women who are returning into society, going through situations that I've experienced. So I share my experience, strength, and hope. I talk about what I did, what happened, and what I'm doing today.
Thank you. Well, Sue gave my bio as well, and I guess the only thing I'd like to say about myself, in addition to the fact that I started Forever Family, or AIM as it used to be called, the other thing I'd like to say about myself is it has been my pleasure for the last 26 years to work on the front lines and to learn and to walk and fight beside April and so many other women like her. So with that, I don't have not one other thing to say about who I am. April and I want to just continue to move forward. You know that this is the 8th webinar in the series that the Clearinghouse has put on. Go to the website and check out some of the other webinars. I just want to say a quick word about the 3 things April and I are going to try to do today. We're going to try to first look at some of the facts and the fiction about incarcerated survivors of battering. 2, we're going to talk about reentry challenges. We're going to cover 4 things under that, and you see them on the agenda up on the screen. And then 3rd, we're going to do what, in my book, and I know for April too, is one of the most important things that we can do, and that's talking about the future, because the past is the past, but it's where we go from here that really matters. April, I'm going to get ready to start talking about the facts and fiction. You want to add anything before I do? No? Good? All right. With that being said, we will go to the next slide. So here are some facts that I want to put out really quickly. 1, many women go to prison because their conviction is connected to them responding to the abuse that they receive from their batterers. Well, guess what? That's a fact. And here's another fact. This webinar is for you. Other women, it wasn't the responding to their battering was not the actual reason they got incarcerated. It wasn't their conviction or their charges, but it really is a part of the reality of their lives. That's a fact. Here's another fact. This webinar is for them. We hope, April and I, to address both situations or scenarios in the webinar. And now I want to move to the biggest fiction, and that is people even now still say, oh, wow, she did something to make him beat her. That is a fiction. And the way we really want to start talking about that fiction is to begin with April telling her story.
Hi, everyone. The reentry.
April, again, I'm sorry, you're just very difficult to hear, and some people in the chat are also mentioning that. So if you're able to speak more closely to your mic, we really want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, yes, ladies.
Thank you.
What does reentry mean to me? Reentry, for me, was like a new beginning and a fresh start, getting my life back in order. The day I found out I was getting out of prison, I dealt with fear, joy, and grief. The fear was I was returning back home to Indiana, where I'm from, and I had wreckage of my past. The joy was I'm getting to see my children, and especially my youngest. She was 28 days old when I went away. And the grief was I was getting out going to my father's funeral. The parole board granted me a early reprieve. They gave my sister 30 minutes to book me a flight so I can leave and never return. While I was in prison, I wrote the parole board on a regular basis once a month so I wouldn't get lost in the system. I got connected. I kept myself busy. They have a saying, don't let the time do you, you do the time. So what I did, I got into different programs. I took parenting classes. I took drug abuse classes. I went to church on a regular basis. And while I was in prison, they had a program that if you meet the requirements, you can be paroled out to this halfway house called Women at the Well. Well, with the help of the with the help of Women at the Well, the bishops, and the chaplains, I was able to get out and go to my father's funeral. Now, when I got out, it wasn't easy. You know, that fear came in. My children's father, I knew he was going to be in Indiana, and I didn't know what to do. But I went to Indiana for like 3 days, long enough to see my father put away, and I returned back. And once I got back, you know, I had set goals, you know, getting a job, finding a place to stay, getting transportation. Those things were easy for me. You know, all women aren't going to be like me, but there are programs that you can go to. This one place called Atlanta Workforce. So if a person has never had a job, they can go there and learn how to do resumes, learn how to be ready to go in and talk to a manager if they would want a job. There was just different things that I should, excuse me, I'm sort of nervous, you guys. Forgive me.
You are fine. You are fine. This is a real conversation with real people. So, so you're fine.
Well, I set my goals. I got the job. I had my job. I got out June 9th. Had me a job July 6th. I was working in the airport.
You continue to work there now, right?
Yes. Because I'm a recovering addict, I went to meetings on a regular basis. I also took a drug treatment program just to help myself, because you can say you're going to do the right thing when you're in prison. It's when you get out, what are you going to do? You know, I got connected. I got into the community. I started doing volunteer work. I went to church. Then one of my hardest challenge for me was getting my children.
Good. That's a great place, because what I want us to do now, April, is to talk even more about children, family, and that challenge. You began really telling us about your coming out and beginning to work on your own healing and your reconciliation and your recovery. And I want to just underscore a couple of things that you said. The first thing that you seem to talk about is the fact that recovery, coming home, reconnecting, reentering, it's hard, and that's a reality for women. So women need to be gentle with themselves. You also talked about all of your feelings, and so some women may feel a deep sense of loss. I mean, they're facing many, many things when they come home, like you did. Getting out of prison, you talked about that. Reconnecting with your kids, we're going to talk more about that. Assuming your parental role and dealing, you called it the wreckage of your past, but dealing with the past abuse and the end of a relationship. And let me ask you if you agree with this, April. Really, women should not put a specific timeline or it's going to take me 30 days, it's going to take me 90 days to deal with this. Should they allow themselves to move forward steadily but at their own pace?
Yes, it's a process. You know, you got to just take it one day at a time, and don't get discouraged. Don't be in a hurry, because right now it's about seeing about yourself. Because you have to realize, if you can't take care of yourself, if you have children you want to get back reunited with, you got to be able to take care of yourself, then you'll be able to take care of them.
Thank you. That is powerful. So that really does kind of lead me to sort of, we just finished bringing your whole self home. And it leads me to the next slide, which really talks about safety planning. the father of your children was in Indiana, and you had to go to Indiana. And I just want to lift that up because there are women out there who return to the community where their batterer is. And if that batterer is a children's father, then there often are custody issues, visitation issues, and they have to interact with them. But it's so important that women remain safe and that the visits they have with their children, either getting them directly from the father's family, that those are not opportunities for you to be victimized, or really, I don't want to use that word victimized, abused again. So women have to really think about safety planning. I want to say a word. Oh, no, you look like you want to say something. This is the conversation. Come on in.
You know, women, if you ever been through abuse, no one deserves to be hit. And what happened with me, my children's father, he wanted to be controlling. He wanted to literally destroy me. I dealt with going to work with black eyes, fractured bones, stitches, even having guns put to my head. When I got away from that man, I remember one incident, the last incident, Easter morning. I went down the street to borrow a slip. We had just moved into an apartment. I came home. This man picked up a 2x4 and hit me in my head. And I remember breaking down, crying. I threw a brick and almost hit my daughters. And at that moment, I had enough. When I left him, I ran off with $8 and a tank of gas. I went to a shelter, explained my situation. They relocated me to another city, Indianapolis. So when I left him, I didn't look back. And sometimes I reflect on the things that he did to me. Yes, I talked back. I'm an adult. I'm grown. I'm not your child. But I had that right. But I think about the women today who are dealing with it. And sometimes if you have children, that makes it hard for you to get out of that relationship because the children, they might love their father. I dealt with my daughter crying, please, Daddy, don't go. And that's why I was able to stay in the relationship for so long. In fact, I was in that relationship for 9 years.
April, when you talk about the children loving their father and saying, Daddy, don't go, one of the things that women also have to consider, while it was not the case with your children, that if he is abusive to them, he may also be abusive to the children, and that abuse could potentially escalate when the mom comes home and he sees the mom back in the children's life. And so one of the things that we really encourage women to do as they create their safety plan is to be honest with their children and talk in language that their kids understand, so that's age-appropriate language, about what's going on and about how it's important for them to have a plan just in case of emergencies. We don't want the children to run and say, Daddy, Mama said when you get angry, this is what I'm supposed to do to be safe. But while that may be the truth, what we want to do is to make sure that we explain the situation to the children with language that they could even share, that just in case there's an emergency, here is, kind of our plan. And so your children need to be prepared for your coming home, for the father's maybe change totally in attitude toward them and toward you. And so, again, safety is really, really important, because for the man, the fact that the mom has gotten out, has moved beyond the situation, can be a trigger that leads to violence for him. So I want to just put that out there before we move forward to the next slide. But now, April, if you can talk a little bit about dealing with anger, fear, and pain, three powerful emotions that belong to sometimes the woman, sometimes to the children, and a lot of times to the family members on both sides. Can you talk a little bit about how you engaged with that?
Well, for me, the anger, when I was released, it seemed like my family was upset because I was out. You know, they held my past against me. There was things they said. They said I was never going to get my kids again. I'm no good. I'm just a criminal. And I went through being hurt. And by my children being in Indiana, it made it real difficult for me. You know, I dealt with them hiding my children. I dealt with my mom secretly trying to adopt them. And for 3.5 years, I went back and forth to Indiana. Me and my mother was literally at war. And then my children, my oldest daughter, she had to deal with hearing them ridicule me, say all these negative and bad things, which they turned her against me. Now, my younger children, all they want to do is be with their mother. I dealt with them when I go visit crying because they didn't want me to leave. And I didn't want to leave them, but I live here in Atlanta. And it was a long, hard process. But through my determination and also being humble, you know, my mother, she was a real difficult woman to deal with. But I overlooked that. I understood that she loved my children. And then she was still in a grieving process over my father passing. So it took time. It has just been, I think it took over 7 years for her to get over the fact that I'm their mother. And yes, these are my kids and they're going with me. She just finally came around a couple years ago. And, you know, I talked to her. She still has said some of the things she want to say. But I let her know I still love her. I'm not trying to take the kids away from her. I just want to be their mother because no one's really going to treat a child like the mother is.
April, when you said that, it made me think about the slide that just went up. And I wanted to share these things. And as I share them, please feel free to chime in. But what I've observed as we've worked with children who had battered, incarcerated mom is that they love their mom, they miss them, they want them to come home, but sometimes they have anxiety and mixed emotions when she actually returns home. And it seemed like you touched a little bit about that, but I've also noticed that sometimes they have feelings of guilt and shame, and those feelings, yes, sometimes can be because other people say negative things about their mom, but sometimes, particularly if they witness the abuse, and I've seen this a lot with boys, they are dealing with the fact that they couldn't protect their mom when they witnessed her being abused physically. And I also noticed that sometimes they have difficulty identifying, expressing, and managing their emotions. They really struggle with what happened, understanding it. And the other thing I see sometimes is that they compartmentalize things. They have to be one way when they're with mom, and they have to be the other way with dad and with his family. And because your children, you had some young and some older, do you think that there's a difference for older children in terms of how they deal with the emotions? Or what is your experience? And you had, at that time, 4 kids, right? 3.
You had 4.
You had 4. Okay.
For the older children, for me, my older 2, they witnessed me getting battered. You know, also drugs came into play. They seen me having an addiction, and they took it harder. And for my younger children, they can't remember those things. See, my older children were at an age that they can remember when their dad was beating me, or they can remember when I would disappear and they'd be with my mother and fathers for weeks at a time. And so it's hard on them mentally. And then they don't know if, say you're doing the right things, they don't know what to expect. They don't know, is she going to run off again? Is she going to get on drugs again? They're scared. And then they're angry because you're not there with them when they need you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I want to pick up as I look at, continuing to look at these reentry challenges. I want to really pick up on what you talked about with your mom. What you described was a complex relationship, and you actually had some coping strategies for dealing with her and with your family. And one of the powerful things that you started the very beginning of the conversation off talking about loving yourself. And I want to ask you, what helped you as you continually were confronted with them bringing up your past, and you'd moved on, you were out, you were working, you were coming every other weekend to visit your family? What things really helped you hold on so that you could deal with them until you got your children back?
It was the love I had for my children. All I wanted was to have my children home with me. And then when I talked to them and then seeing that smile on their face when they knew Mama was coming, I would leave Atlanta at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning, and I would get to Indiana as soon as school got out. I stayed there till Sunday, and what I did, I had my cousin had a home where I had my own key. So I'd pick the children up on Friday. We'd go to the grocery store. We did family activities, and it made it easier for me because all I had to do was deal with my mom long enough to get the children, and then take them with me. You know, she said what she wanted to say, but I didn't let them make me get angry and do something that I will regret.
Thank you. And so really what you're talking about is claiming your own personal power and not allowing anyone, not even your family, to take that from you. And that's awesome. And I really I both love and respect that about you, my friend. Well, I want to keep moving on in our discussion because I want to make sure we leave some time for question and answers. But I want to get to that Reenter challenge number 4, connecting and reintegrating into the community. Sometimes women who come back home don't know about the services that are available out there for them. And that really, whether they've been gone a year, 10 years, or 20 years, there are agencies that will really help them deal with, as you call it, the wreckage of their past and what I call the building blocks of their future. So women sometimes feel isolated and alone and without options. I know that that was not the case for you. You came out and connected to the community. Let me ask you to do 2 things. One is to describe, again, maybe not so much the names, but the types of organizations you connected with. And then can you say a word for organizations that want to work with women? What kind of things do we need to think about?
Well, when I one of the organizations, I did volunteer work. I went to the Atlanta Day Shelter for Women and Children. I helped organize a Narcotics Anonymous program because some women are homeless because they might have a drug problem. Some were in a battered relationship. They may have lost their job. So I would go there, do the meetings. I also shared my experience, strength, and hope, because I remember there was a time I had been homeless. You know, I had a drug addiction problem, but I didn't let that keep me down. And I just want to say to the organizations that there's a need for your support, and women need to know that there's someone that cares, but will be helpful if you can involve individuals who have lived the experience.
That is powerful. You know, what you really talk about is, in addition to working on moving forward in your own life, you really used your gifts and talents, your life experience, to help other women, so you gave something back. I applaud that, and I totally agree with you when you say those of us who do this work need to involve women who have the lived experience. And I want to support that and also say, not just in the running of the classes or the teaching and the mentoring, but in the program planning, implementation, the governance of our nonprofits. We need women desperately who have had the lived experience to co-lead with us, to step up sometimes when we step to the side or step back, and to really help us shape the policies that govern the nonprofits that we want run. Well, April, we're going to the last piece of our 3-part agenda. I'm moving to planning for the future. And I guess I want to say to you, I admire the way you built your future. So when you were getting ready to come home and when you came home, what really went through your mind? I mean, look at who you, well, first of all, you have always been an awesome woman, but look at who you are fully now, into claiming all of who you are. What was it when you envisioned a future for yourself and your kids, and it was many years before you got them? What was it that you envisioned, and how might other women see a vision like that?
For me, when I found out I was being released, I was so excited. I remember the day I walked out that gate. Yeah, I was on my way to my father's funeral, but I was free. I remember when I stepped out those gates, I got down on my knees and I kissed the ground. They thought I had passed out. But all I needed to be was free. You know, when I was in prison, I sat and thought, what I got to do? I knew I had to get a job. I knew I had to get transportation and get a home. But what helped me is realizing and recognizing that I'm an addict also. And it wasn't until I went to prison. That was the hardest thing in my life for me. I was at a complete standstill because I was the type of person I could take off and move to another location with no problem. All I needed was a way to get there. And when I was in that standstill, I looked at me. See, the problem was myself. I couldn't run from myself. So by me looking at myself and realizing, yes, I'm an addict, and in order for me to do the right things, to move forward, I got to address that issue. You know, I could get clean, but I couldn't stay clean. So when I got out, I was willing to go to drug classes. I went through the drug class. I was willing to go to meetings on a regular basis. I called my children. I talked to them. I didn't get discouraged because during my custody battle, they made it almost impossible. I dealt with them signing over sole custody to my mother without a hearing. I dealt with, because I went to prison, people ridiculing me, but I didn't let what they said to me or said about me discourage me, because my children, it was the love that I had for my kids, and I knew what it was to be a mother. I knew I had to build a foundation. I had to have a structured environment for my children, and I was willing to do that, to get a place to stay, a job, and a home, a job and transportation. None of that was hard for me. The biggest challenge for me was getting my children. So it took me over 5 years to finally just settle everything. But in the process, it just kept me going. And I even went to school. I took some school classes. I went to school at Atlanta Metropolitan. And I stayed on my job. I started working in the airport in 2000. Here it is, 2000, going on 2014. I'm still there. And through my struggle of fighting for my kids after 9/11, the airport said that any convicted felon was not going to be able to work at the airport unless they cleared up their record. So when I was dealing with getting custody for my children here, I was dealing also with going to lose my job. But by me being persistent and finding out that it was possible, April 7th, 2003, my record was cleared.
You got
I'm
a
the
pardon.
first known black woman to ever receive a pardon in the state of Georgia.
Wow.
So I had a lot of things that keep me going, and I had women I went to, like when I was dealing with the custody issues, I came to AIM, which is now Forever Family. They helped me put together a portfolio that showed everything I was doing from being in prison from the time I got home. Donna Hubbard Spearman with Women at the Well Transitional. She kept me going. She kept me going to different events. You know, we did volunteering things for different ministries here and there. Then a lady I met afterwards, which I'm with the organization now, Julie Walker, with Keeping the Bond. And I have a pastor. I met her in prison. You know, I go to church. If they do bake sales, I volunteer to come help Reverend Hazel Horn. These were people that helped nurture me and gave me my support. It was like my new family.
Thank you, and a shout out to each of the women and organizations that you named for the powerful work they're doing in Atlanta, Georgia. I want to do two things. I want to just follow up with the key elements or steps that you talked about in terms of a plan, and then I want to get us to step back and talk about what the prison can do while women are inside. So here are the 4 steps for the success plan that you talked about. The first one, you said it needs to involve your children and your family. Second, that you created both short and long-term goals for yourself. And number 3, you had many, not one mentor or accountability partner. You had many accountability partners. But the most powerful thing that you talked about in your plan is that you created a realistic plan that you could work. So I'm going to put the next slide up that talks about your accountability partner and getting a mentor. But before we go to that, can you say one word about what is some step, big or small, that the prison can do? Because prisons are filled with women who are survivors of battering. What's something they can do while women are on the inside?
Things that a woman can do in prison, if you're an addict, they have drug treatment classes you can take. They also have a drug abuse class that you can complete to show that you did address your issue.
So the prisons have to offer these things, right? Okay,
right.
Go ahead.
Then there was parenting classes.
Okay.
I became a certified forklift operator. Okay. And just before I was getting ready to get out, I had got into a class for cosmetology.
Cosmetology.
Yeah.
I got you. So it sounds like what you're saying is that prisons need to make sure that they're offering relevant programming that will help women get prepared to come home. Is that right, April?
Yes, that's right.
Cool. All right. Well, on the screen, the slide that they see is finding, I'm calling her a sister outsider mentor. And that person needs to be available either in person or by phone. And what they really need to do is to support you and hold you accountable. I believe you had women along the way who gave you feedback and held you accountable. Is there any insight or word of advice you would give to a woman who's looking for a mentor?
Ladies, it's about getting involved in the community. Okay. You got to be willing to want to step out and do some volunteer work. Go to church. If you need help with getting a job, if you're in Atlanta, go to the workforce.
Oh, you're talking about Atlanta Workforce Development. I think part of what you're saying, tell me if I'm right, is that in order to find people to mentor you, you've got to get out and meet people and then find mentors. It may be more than one in the different areas that you're dealing with. Is that right, April?
Yes, that's right.
All right. I wanted to make sure I quoted you correctly. Well, we've heard a good bit of April's story, and I really want to ask you now, April, we're about to wrap up our portion and leave time for questions and answers, but is there anything about your personal journey that you haven't shared that you want to share? Is there any advice you want to give to women who are struggling with the same issues? Just what would you like to say before we open up for questions?
Ladies, just remember this. No one can change or alter your past. But what you do, you learn from your mistakes and keep moving. No, it's not going to be easy. And yes, there's people going to judge you. But just remember, that was something you did. That's not who you are. It's about loving yourself and finding a new way to live.
That is powerful. Well, it has been our pleasure to have this part of the conversation with you, but we don't want it to be a one-sided conversation. So we'd like, if there are questions that people have, we'd like to answer them if we can. So I'd like to open it up for questions. Sue, are you still on the line?
I sure am. Thank you,
Can you
so
lead us?
much, Sandra and April. Just really incredibly powerful information. So thank you so much for sharing all of it. We have a couple of questions, but for all of you who are participating, if you have questions for our presenters, if you could please put them in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner, that would be terrific. We'd really appreciate it. The first one we got is actually, both of them are for you, April, although Sandra can certainly chime in, particularly to the second one. And this is optional, April, of course, as is true of any of the questions if you feel like answering it. The question was about your mother, actually, and about whether or not, I'll say exactly what the question says. It says, did your mother grieve your loss while incarcerated? And if you don't feel like talking about your mother anymore, I understand that. So that's your choice, of course.
No, I don't feel my mother did grieve my loss. In fact, I feel like she was sort of glad that I was away.
Interesting. The next question is one that I hope you both will weigh in on. One of the, what it says is, it's as a prison administrator, I believe that reentry starts at intake, and I would think that all of us who are on this call would agree with that. Prison can unintentionally continue the trauma, which makes the transition to community harder. What would April recommend as a, quote, simple solution or a, quote, little step that a prison could do to make a big impact for incarcerated women who have experienced this trauma?
Wow. April talked about that a little bit earlier when she talked about classes and stuff, but what would you add to that, April?
Children will help keep a mother going. When you first went, for me, my daughter was 28 days old when they took her away from me, and prison was the hardest thing in the world because you have to just sit there and look at yourself. I kept constant contact with my children through letters, but I wasn't fortunate enough to get visits from my children. And it's good if you have children to get connected, like with Forever Families. Be able to see your children once a month, being able to talk to them and having a visit. I didn't get no visits. I barely got any letters. So it was hard on me, but you keep yourself busy. You got to be accountable for what you did while you're there. It ain't nobody's fault but yourself. And you just got to just hold on.
Thank you. I would add, first of all, let me say, April, you hit the nail on the head. There needs to be inside of prisons child-friendly spaces for visitation so that mom can hug her child. If it's a baby like your newborn, change the diaper, have that emotional bonding. And so I would encourage prison administrators to first begin to review their visitation policies and to create more child-friendly policies. Offline, people are more than welcome to go to Forever Family's website and contact me. We have a checklist of things prisons can do to make visitation more child-friendly. And if they've got a spare room in the prison, maybe they need to change it so that they decorate that room, and once a month they have special visits there to begin with. Or maybe one Saturday in the summer they have a camp on the grounds of the prison that allows children to come and interact and visit more with their parents. And what research tells us is visitation is really the key. Research says that women who have visitation with their children during the period of their incarceration have less disciplinary issues. That seems normal. End up taking more classes, and when they get out, they are less likely to come back. And I know from our 26 years of experience that not only is that true, but the children do better as well. Their self-esteem, they know no matter what, mommy loves me. And so those would be the beginning kind of small steps that a prison could take. Any other questions, Sue?
I actually had one for you myself, which is, have the two of you seen that piece that Sesame Street did, the DVD and the booklets about when a parent is incarcerated? And if so, I wonder what you think about it. And
yes,
Christina,
I have seen.
Maybe you could get the link for that, if that's not too much trouble, please.
Yeah. Yes, I have seen the video and I've read the materials, and I think they are good. One of the biggest struggles, and I think April really talked about it, is being able to connect with each of the individual children at their level. And so she talked about our older children and then the younger ones and the different ways they responded. But I think the Sesame Street material is very good. We recommend it now to our new families that come, and they can get it through, our website and get it online. But yes, I do support the creation and the use of those materials because children need a language for all of this. There's also another really good book called Visiting Day, written by a woman by the name of Jacqueline, and I think Jacqueline's last name might be Woodson, African-American writer, author, who tells the story of a little girl who goes to visit with her grandmother. But there are a number of books and materials out there now that really, another one is when talking to Andy, it's called When Andy's Dad Goes to Prison. But all of these are books that can help really support families in terms of how to get prepared and to engage in the visit. So I recommend the Sesame Street and these other materials. And I think it'd be great if the prisons also had these books I mentioned and the Sesame Street materials to share with the moms, with the parents.
That's great. And thank you, Dot, for putting up the links to the Sesame Street and the Visiting Day up in the chat box. So there was another question from a woman who facilitates a support group at a women's correctional facility in Ohio. Her question is, I am wondering what important topics you think should be part of the curriculum.
Wow. April, you want to respond first?
Well, parenting classes, drug dependency. They could be probably mental counseling for the abuse that they've been through, the abuse.
Yeah. I want to touch on that one you talked about, parenting classes, and I want to sort of go a little deeper under the surface. I agree with her. There needs to be parenting classes, but there also needs to be sessions on what it means to co-parent. Some women are co-parenting with the other parent on the outside. Some are co-parenting with their mom, but there really does need to be a whole class sessions dealing with the drama of co-parenting with someone, whether that person is your spouse, your former lover, or a relative. I also think there needs to be a session on dealing with your own guilt, because sometimes our guilt will guilt trip us into doing a whole bunch of stuff that is, in the short term, it may seem good, but in the long term, for our children, isn't. And by that, we have a therapist who works with us, and one of the sessions that she deals with in terms of guilt for the moms is to say to them, yes, okay, you wish you weren't here, you realize you made mistakes to get here, you want to be accountable, but co-signing everything your kid wants to do because you're inside, because you feel guilty about it, doesn't work. So I really think sessions which help women face the reality, and April talked about it, about where they are, but talks about how they, from that place, can parent is important. And then the other thing that you said, April, that I really want to, just co-sign is that preparation for coming home, getting ready way before you're about to leave to come home. I think reunification with your children starts from the day you get locked in, but planning to come home does too. And there are a lot of steps, as you took, that women can take on the way, on the road inside to getting out. Anything else you want to add to that, April?
You said it now.
Oh, that was very helpful, well, as all of the stuff you've been saying. Here's another question that came up, directed at April. How has your experience affected your parenting style?
It's made me a better mother. I was young. I had a lot of help with my children, with my parents, even before I went to prison or went through what I went through. But I know the kids don't have to have everything they want. When I was young, I went along with just so they wouldn't cry, or if they wanted something, they were spoiled rotten. But it's helped me. I think about, it makes me be grateful for the little things, like being able to go to the park with my children, being able to cook dinner, help them with homework, go to different special events that the kids are having. For me, I'm a better person. I'm older. I'm almost 50. But I think prison sort of saved my life.
I wanted to just comment on my observation of April and her kids, because they were just up here last week. And, well, every time almost that you come up here to drop stuff, April did not mention it, but she's a volunteer with us. And we just did a big fundraiser, our annual fundraiser, which was a 5K fun run for kids, and April was one of the biggest advocates for that, and got a bunch of sponsors for the event. She and her family ran in the event Saturday, but so over the last 3 or 4 months, I've seen her kids almost regularly. And the thing that I can say about my observation of her parenting is this. I didn't know you before you went, to prison and came home, but what I saw or what I see, April, is that quality time is so important to you. Just last week when you were up here with your daughter and your son, y'all were getting ready to go somewhere after you left. And, you were here bringing information, but you were very clear that you were going wherever y'all went with your children. And then when you went out of town for your daughter's graduation, I guess what I see about you that is so powerful is it's that you appear centered, right? And that you keep the main thing. And what you communicate to me and clearly to your children is that they, your husband, your family, it is your main thing. And that, I think, is so important because there's so many of us who've not been on your journey who can't keep the main thing.
And one other thing I want to say, prison sort of helped me realize what a foundation and structure is. I was back in my children's life when they needed me the most. My daughter, one I talked about, I ran off when she was 5 months old. November 1st, she graduated from Navy boot camp. She's a certified sailor, and she's in Meridian, Mississippi right now. So it sort of helped me, do the things that a mother needs to do for her children and show them, be a example in their life.
I want to say this before you go to the next question, and I want you to hear me, April, and feel me on this one. I am glad that those things happened to you. What I want and what you and I are working on together and the people who are listening to this webinar are working on and others in the movement is women not having to experience the pain of being beaten or going to prison to move to where you are now. All right, Sue.
Here, Sandra, for sure. Another question from a participant. Did April receive any domestic violence-specific services while incarcerated?
No, I didn't. I didn't get any because when I left him, there was some years in between. All he was a memory. Sometimes I think about what he put me through, and then I look at, everything I went through, it's got me in the position where I am right now.
Well, let me ask this. Were there actually any domestic violence classes being offered at the prison when you were there?
And to be honest, they didn't offer any. They had if you had a anger problem, but for domestic violence, they didn't offer that.
Well, whoever asked the question about what the prison can do, that's another thing that they can do is to offer classes. Yeah. And here's the thing that April said that I think when they offer classes, they need to think through. Just because you put up a sign, have you been battered, come to class, or announce over the loudspeaker inside the prison, domestic violence class meeting in the chapel, every woman is not going to go. Every woman is not going to go. So how do we create an environment that focuses on healing? Y'all don't want me to go there. I don't know if healing is a word they use a lot up in the prison, inside the prison, but other than the healing of physical ailments. But maybe it's about offering classes that work on healing and recovery so that women who do not self-identify, right, in a way that they feel like they need domestic violence support services will think about the need to heal their own lives. And as they work on healing their lives, they will begin to think about, hey, I went through that, I survived it, but maybe I really do have some process healing work to do around it. I don't know, April, that may not be an approach, but just to me, announcing that over the loudspeaker or putting up that sign in the child line that says you can go to the chapel to get some help for domestic violence all women may not respond to that. What do you think?
That's the truth. Some women might not even know, because I know for a while when I used to go to work and I might have black eyes, I'd make up excuses. This is why this happened to me, or they're ashamed, and it just takes time. And one of the things they have to focus on: what am I going to do when I get out? So while they're in there, they're away from that abuser, so they feel like in their mind they're not going to go back to him, so they don't need to go through these classes, and
they don't, right?
Mhm.
I think what you're saying in terms of the power of language and labels is really important. And I just posted, for those of you who are currently running groups or have in the past in jails or prisons, if you share the language you use. And we'll also put that up on our listserv and just see what people are using to call together women who have had tough past and may not want to share it for all sorts of reasons, not be labeled as somebody who's a victim of domestic violence or a survivor of domestic violence.
And also, too, as in prison is like our world, knowledge is power, and in a smaller environment, the more you know about people, in many ways, the more power you could potentially have. And so women, as a mode of self-protection, don't always share and disclose things. Doesn't mean they're not hurting from it. Doesn't mean they don't even want to deal with it. But because their survival may really depend on what information they keep to themselves and keep hidden, that whole language piece may be what will keep them from reaching out for what they need.
And if I could say one more thing, a woman is quickly to listen to someone who has experienced it than hearing someone that want to tell them, this is what you do, this is how you do it, but that person ain't never went through that. So here comes the part where I mentioned they should involve individuals who have lived the experience.
Yes. Thank you.
Very powerful.
Thank you.
You ready for another question?
Yes.
Okay. April, your story is so inspiring. Can you and your colleagues speak to some of the economic barriers survivors face and ways to achieve economic security upon reentry?
Wow. Ooh, that's a good one. Well, can I give my two little ones, and then you can, because I can tell you really about to go there with this one. Well, the first thing I guess I would say is that for me, women need to have some type of fun when they come home. Here in Georgia, you get out with $25 and your bus ticket home. And if your family, and oftentimes they are not able to put money aside and save for you to come home, having